Barbra Streisand once joked that the secret to a long, happy marriage was found in the bedroom, but behind that playful line is a reality far stranger than anyone expected. For nearly 30 years, her relationship with James Brolin has confused friends, stunned insiders, and sparked rumors that simply refuse to die. Why do they refuse to share a bank account? Why do Brolin's children slowly drift away from family gatherings? And why does every attempt at normalcy inside their home seem to reveal something even more unusual? This video pulls back the curtain on the habits, boundaries, and hidden rules that have left Hollywood whispering for decades and exposes why so many believe Barbra Streisand's marriage has gone far beyond weird. She was crazy as a loon. He later said wild, blunt, and absolutely unforgettable, and he wanted her from the moment she opened her mouth. The first meeting between Barbra Streisand and James Brolin in 1996 wasn't glamorous or staged like some Hollywood fantasy. It was a blind date arranged by friends, and within seconds Barbra shattered every romantic expectation. Brolin walked in with his head freshly shaved for a role, and instead of offering a polite compliment, she looked him dead in the eye and said, "Who ruined your hair?" Most men would have been insulted. Brolin was mesmerized. He later admitted that her honesty, that unfiltered boldness, hit him harder than any flirtation ever could. That single moment set the tone for a relationship that would follow none of Hollywood's familiar rules. At the time, Brolin was in his 50s, rebuilding his life after his second divorce and embracing complete solitude. Streisand, meanwhile, was in a phase where emotional commitments didn't interest her at all. Neither was looking for a partner. Neither wanted something serious. Yet somehow, after that chaotic first meeting, the two fell into a rhythm that felt eerily natural, almost too natural. They talked every day. They had quiet dinners together. They checked in on each other like seasoned partners, not to people still deciding whether a second date was worth it. There was no phase of cautious observation, no hesitation, no uncertainty. They simply moved toward each other, ignoring every traditional step that most couples consider essential. During an interview years later, a host reminded Barbra of her infamous first comment about Brolin's hair. She smiled and said simply, "Because I told him the truth." And Brolin, who once described her as wonderful and crazy, said he fell in love in that very moment. It wasn't charm. It wasn't seduction. It was truth, blunt, fearless, delivered like only Barbra Streisand could. 2 years after that unusual first encounter, they got married. The date they chose, July 1st, wasn't picked for convenience, or weather, or the comfort of guests. It was chosen because it marked the exact day they first met. It was their way of folding the beginning into the commitment, turning a private spark into a permanent landmark. It wasn't just a wedding day. Barbra later wrote in her memoir, "My Name is Barbra." It was the day our lives shifted forever. Brolin's devotion was equally dramatic. In an interview with Parade, he confessed something that stunned readers. "I didn't want to sleep because if I did, I'd be away from Barbra for a few hours." The quote circulated for years, eventually inspiring the emotional tone behind the hit song "I Don't Want to Miss a Thing." When Barbra was asked about the connection, she admitted that she had heard Brolin say that line countless times, and every time, it perfectly reflected the way he loved her intensely, unapologetically, and without the slightest concern for what anyone else thought. For most people, entering a serious relationship in their 50s comes with doubt, questions about compatibility, energy, timing, and whether love still has space to grow. But for Barbra Streisand and James Brolin, their 50s weren't a late start. They were the perfect beginning. Without the pressure to build a family from scratch or perform some grand, youthful version of romance, they chose something quieter. They began with silence, and they protected that silence with honesty. Streisand once told CBS, "He's the only person I ever met that I didn't have to put up any defenses with." It wasn't about shared hobbies or matching personalities. It was about finally meeting someone she didn't have to edit herself, or someone she didn't have to impress, explain to, or shrink around. For James Brolin, the shift was even more dramatic. After 3 years of complete physical solitude following his divorce, he'd grown used to being alone, used to depending on no one. But after their wedding night, he admitted something that surprised even him. "I realized I had never felt so attached to anyone," he said on CBS Mornings. His openness about this didn't just reveal comfort, it revealed the raw foundation of their relationship. No hiding, no hesitation, no pretending. But even with all the harmony, real life still introduced its friction, and those moments, the ones behind closed doors, exposed the strange, almost unconventional structure that would become the foundation of their marriage. After marrying in 1998, Streisand and Brolin began living together under an unusual, almost informal agreement. Each would keep their own rhythms, their own routines, their own way of being, but they would share a common space. The first sign of their differences came with their internal clocks. Streisand is nocturnal by nature. She works through the night, reading notes, editing music, reviewing scripts, listening to recordings, all while the world sleeps. Brolin, on the other hand, rises with the sun. He likes his morning routine, fresh air, gardening, breakfast at the same time every day. Neither asked the other to adjust. Neither pretended to change. Instead, they built their life around a single shared anchor, the bed. For them, The bed became more than a place to sleep. It was their office, their reading corner, their meeting room, their safe zone. They worked from it, rested in it, shared stories on it, made calls while sitting side by side, and caught up on the day before falling asleep. In 2025, Brolin even said in an interview that the mattress they bought was the best investment in our 27 years of marriage. Streisand echoed that sentiment, saying they often lay there late at night, each on their phone doing their own work, but still next to each other, connected, yet undisturbed. It was their strange version of togetherness, a way to live a shared life without sacrificing personal comfort. Their differences extended to finances as well, in a way that continues to shock outsiders. Streisand and Brolin do not share bank accounts. They handle every personal expense separately, just as they did before they ever met. Despite living on a massive Malibu estate, they've maintained the same financial independence they'd built in their earlier lives. Streisand controls every part of her music and film royalties. Brolin has separate income from television roles and commercials. Keeping everything separate, they say, eliminates financial friction before it even begins. Then there is their creative boundary, a strict rule both refuse to break. Streisand doesn't read the scripts Brolin works on. Brolin doesn't comment on Streisand's films, music, or directing projects. They don't critique each other's careers. They don't offer advice unless asked. Their work worlds remain separate, untouched, and unchallenged by the other. To them, this is what preserves respect. To outsiders, it's yet another reason their marriage has long been considered beautifully committed. And undeniably strange, they spend long stretches of time alone, finishing their own work in their own ways, and only come together afterward to talk about the day. This rhythm, separate first, shared second, reduces tension and prevents the clashes that can easily erupt when two powerful creative minds start weighing in on each other's professional decisions. Streisand has said many times that it's not necessary to eat dinner together every night. If their schedules don't match, they simply eat separately. When they do share a meal, it's often planned in advance, almost like a ceremony, a moment they choose intentionally, not something forced by routine. For Brolin, that distance is essential. He once said, "We don't have to agree on every detail as long as we both understand why it's necessary." Their marriage functions on a principle that few couples dare to practice. Personal space is not a weakness, it's respect, and that belief extends far beyond just work or meals. It also defines how they navigate extended family. Streisand and Brolin's stepchildren remain part of their lives but rarely appear in their home or at major gatherings. Josh Brolin once mentioned publicly that he didn't visit his father and stepmother at all during the pandemic. Streisand's son, Jason Gould, has always lived independently and has chosen not to participate in public events where Brolin is present. To outsiders, this creates a family that looks distant, fragmented, or even cold. But in their world, it's a functional system, clear boundaries between generations, clear separation of spaces, and no pressure for forced togetherness. It's not the warm, buzzing family portrait Hollywood expects, but it has created a stable environment that has lasted nearly 3 decades. Only when age and health began to shift did the cracks in this unusual rhythm start to show. Maintaining these carefully designed habits became harder, and the old patterns needed to stretch further than ever before. Before James Brolin entered her life, Barbra Streisand's romantic history was a pattern of intensity, fierce connections that burned bright, yet rarely lasted. From her early years into the late 1980s, she moved through a series of relationships shaped by her overwhelming ambition, rising fame, and the magnetic pull she had in the industry. Her first major relationship was with Elliot Gould. They married in 1963, just as her career was beginning its explosive climb. They had a son, Jason, and for a brief period it seemed like a traditional Hollywood family might be possible. But as Streisand's star Rosie Music Film Theatre Awards, global recognition, the pressure on their marriage intensified. Gould once admitted that his wife's success made him feel overshadowed, left behind. Streisand confirmed in her memoir that the imbalance was impossible to ignore. She was accelerating, expanding, achieving everything she had dreamed of, while the relationship could no longer keep up. Eventually, the distance between them grew into silence, and they divorced in 1971. After Gould, Streisand entered a transformative period, marked by one of the most significant relationships of her life, producer John Peters. Their romance was private but deeply influential. Peters played a major role in shaping her artistic direction and helped bring her vision to the screen in some of her most iconic projects, including A Star is Born. Streisand later said that Peters was the first lover she truly felt she could lean on, someone who made her feel protected and understood. Yet combining personal and professional life is never easy. The pressures of Hollywood, the merging of creative worlds, and the intensity of their shared ambitions made the relationship spiral into tension. It became passionate, volatile, creative, and exhorting everything that Streisand had lived through for decades. And it was only after those years of imbalance, emotional friction, and complicated partnerships that she finally walked into a blind date in 1996 and met James Brolin, a man who didn't need her fame, didn't chase her spotlight, and didn't want to shape her career. He simply wanted her. And that difference, quiet, strange, and steady changed everything. The two finally split after clashing repeatedly over artistic control, a pattern that marked much of Streisand's romantic life throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. In the years that followed, she moved through a string of short-lived relationships with high-profile figures. Don Johnson, Ryan O'Neal, and Pierre Trudeau were three of the most talked-about men in her orbit. With Don Johnson, the romance lasted less than 2 weeks, just 13 days before both realized their lives were moving too fast in opposite directions. With Pierre Trudeau, the former Canadian Prime Minister, the spark was real and immediate. They met at an arts fundraiser, bonded over politics and culture, but neither was willing to maintain a rigid schedule or sacrifice independence, so the relationship remained brief. Her time with Ryan O'Neal lasted longer, but conflicting work demands and clashing lifestyles slowly pulled them apart. Then came the shock that Hollywood still talks about her relationship with tennis superstar Andre Agassi. Streisand was in her 50s, Agassi was in his 20s. They attended events together, exchanged playful public comments, and for a short period became the most unlikely couple in entertainment. Agassi later admitted he was drawn to her strength, confidence, and fearless personality. Streisand, meanwhile, said she taught tennis to a young man but learned more about herself. But the age difference, conflicting life phases, and diverging priorities ensured the romance ended as quickly as it began. James Brolin's arrival was unlike any relationship before him. There was no competition, no shared projects, no strategic pairing for fame. He didn't try to shape her career, overshadow her, or ride her influence. Streisand has said repeatedly that Brolin was the first person she truly felt at ease with, someone who didn't demand anything from her except authenticity. Brolin wasn't chasing career explosions at the time either. He was settled, seasoned, and secure in his own identity, which made him the quiet opposite of every man who came before. And together, they slid into a rhythm that was private, consistent, and strange enough to work until age introduced a challenge their unusual lifestyle wasn't prepared to handle. As years passed and health began to shift, the stability they relied on for decades was suddenly tested. Habits that once felt harmless, staying up late every night, spending whole days in bed working, rarely going outside, keeping erratic schedules slowly turned into genuine medical concerns. When Brolin entered his 80s, his health began to decline, but he refused to adjust his lifestyle. He kept every old habit, the late nights, the midnight snacks, the long hours doing personal routines without rest. Streisand, watching closely, realized something was changing in ways she could no longer control. Still, despite growing concerns, both agreed to keep the details private. During a CBS interview, when the host subtly mentioned the possibility that Brolin was undergoing long-term treatment, Streisand did what she always does. She protected him. She smiled and said simply, "He's still with me every day, still staying up late and making sandwiches like before." It was her way of saying, yes, things have changed, but the world doesn't get to see the cracks. Their habits, strange, private, unconventional, were now tied to age, not preference, and the couple who had built an entire marriage on independence, distance, and personal rituals now faced the hardest question of all. How do you keep a strange rhythm alive when the body no longer cooperates? Their marriage, once considered odd, now stood at a crossroads where love had to carry the weight of time. And in that quiet shift, the real test of their strange, enduring normal began. She never confirmed the exact name of his illness, but she did admit there were stretches marked by overwhelming anxiety, the kind that settles into a home quietly and forces everything to move more slowly. And in the middle of it all, Brolin tried to keep things simple. In a conversation with the Today Show, he joked that the secret to staying healthy was sleeping on the same mattress and getting enough rest beside a wife who never goes to bed early. It wasn't meant to be poetic, it was an honest reflection of their life. Their routines did not change even as their bodies did. They didn't switch to separate beds. They didn't start going to sleep earlier. They didn't adjust their schedules or divide their living space. Everything that had carried them through nearly 3 decades remained exactly the same. In her 2025 album, Streisand included a small note, not dramatic, not sorrowful, but filled with an unmistakable tenderness. She wrote about caring for someone without making them feel weak, about love that watches over without suffocating. She never used the word sick, but listeners could sense that something heavy had passed through their home. Rather than taking a full break from work, she shifted everything to her Malibu estate. She recorded from her private studio, reviewed scripts from the same bedroom where she'd worked for years, and reshaped her entire schedule around being close to Brolin. No long interviews, no major award shows, no cross-country flights. She was invited to a prestigious tribute in New York, the kind of event she never declined, but she cancelled at the last minute because she needed to stay home. Soon after, Brolin posted a short message on social media: "Someone doesn't need to go anywhere to be the center of my life." It wasn't dramatic, wasn't emotional, but the simplicity struck people deeply. The post went viral because it captured exactly who they were: quiet, private, and strangely devoted in their own way. As age tightened its grip, they leaned even more into seclusion. They didn't bring in nurses, They didn't consider assisted living. They didn't ask family members to move in. Brolin still walked into the garden every morning. Streisand still curated her music every night, reread scripts, rewrote lyrics on songs the world hasn't heard yet. Neither showed any sign of stepping away from their craft. Their life became smaller, but not emptier, just more contained. In an October 2025 interview with Parade magazine, Streisand revealed that she had begun rewriting parts of her will, not because of fear, she insisted, but because she needed clarity after everything that's happened. She meticulously arranged the division of assets, music rights, film rights, and personal belongings with no lawyers mediating the conversations. Brolin sat beside her at every meeting. He didn't argue for anything, didn't ask for adjustments, didn't try to intervene. Their children weren't involved either. Streisand informed her son Jason, but made sure he wasn't responsible for any decisions. Brolin maintained the same distance with his stepchildren, especially Josh, who openly stated that his father and stepmother never pressured him to participate in hospital discussions, finances, or end-of-life planning. Every choice they made, from the way they slept to the way they structured their will, became part of a quiet system. Not dramatic, not emotional, just intentional. Their final stage together raises a silent question that hangs over every detail. What exactly are they trying so hard to hold on to? And why has this strange, private model survived nearly 3 decades untouched, even as time and age turned every habit into a test? But before we can understand what keeps them together now, we must go back and see how it all started. The moment 2 lives collided and built something Hollywood still calls beyond weird, yet somehow unbreakably real. The principles behind this strange, enduring marriage were not created overnight. They were molded long before James Brolin ever walked into Barbra Streisand's life, shaped by years of instability, reinvention, and hard-earned self-control. Streisand didn't step into this marriage searching for excitement or a new chapter to fill a void. She arrived after surviving storms in both her career and personal life, and those experiences carved out the blueprint of what she would and would not accept before she became the quiet, commanding figure the public sees today. Her early years were marked by constant shifts. At the beginning of her career, she faced prejudice about everything: her looks, her voice, her confidence, even the way she loved. She was labeled unapproachable, too outspoken, too independent, too unwilling to compromise. Yet it was those very criticisms that built the shell she needed. By learning early to depend on herself, she refused to fit into anyone else's idea of what a woman, artist, or partner should be. It also meant she would not accept any relationship that tried to mold her, limit her, or place her inside a system she did not choose. Her past relationships, from Elliot Gould to John Peters to all the short-lived romances in between, each collapsed for the same reason. None provided the balance she craved. She didn't need anyone to take care of her, but she did want someone who understood how she lived, someone who wouldn't disrupt her rhythm. She spoke often about companionship without demands, a principle that quietly guided her long before Brolin ever appeared. And when he finally did, he fit that principle in a way no one else ever had. James Brolin was not a box office king or a Hollywood phenomenon. He wasn't chasing fame, wasn't drowning in ambition, and wasn't trying to compete with her spotlight. He had his own steady career, no scandals, and lived far from the chaos of modern Hollywood. That calmness, that maturity made him the right match. Streisand didn't need fireworks. She needed space, stability, and someone who didn't require her to shrink or shift. Their age wasn't an obstacle. It was the reason their marriage worked. Streisand once said, "There are things you can only do when you no longer need to prove anything to anyone." Marrying Brolin was one of those things. They didn't need to parade their love publicly, didn't need to pose for the media, didn't need grand gestures or declarations. What they needed was a quiet understanding. Keep your own habits, respect each other's space, protect the connection. That was enough. Streisand's music career also played a role in shaping their dynamic. When she worked in the studio, she disappeared into her art arrangement, lyrics, edits, every detail under her control. Brolin didn't intrude. He didn't advise. He never hovered backstage. And when Brolin accepted a television role, Streisand didn't visit the set, didn't evaluate his performance, didn't comment on his choices. That separation of creative worlds made both of them feel safe, trusted, and unpressured. Then came the financial boundaries. Even after marriage, Streisand kept every asset in her name: music rights, film rights, investments, properties. Brolin managed his own money separately. It wasn't suspicion. It was protection, a way to preserve the peace they had built. Marriage should not turn into a financial joint venture, she once said. And with that one line, she confirmed what many suspected. She had no intention of repeating the mistakes of her past. So from a blind date with no expectations, Barbra Streisand and James Brolin built one of Hollywood's strangest, most unconventional marriages, a model that has lasted nearly 3 decades without following a single familiar rule. It is not loud, not dramatic, not traditional, but it works quietly, firmly, and entirely on their terms. If you found their journey fascinating, share this video with someone who appreciates real-life stories that defy expectations. leave a comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of the extraordinary lives behind Hollywood's most unforgettable stars.